this talk. Me and Smirker were working one day, and he was saying that there was not enough speakers for CarolinaCon, and I got home that night and proceeded to slam down a bunch of bourbons and say, I'm going to come up with a talk idea, and I did, and there it is. And then I put an abstract in, and then I totally forgot about it and lost the email, so I actually had to figure out what I was supposed to talk about. So this is that talk, and it's probably one of the most difficult ones I've ever done because of the research that went into it. So hopefully everyone enjoys it. The disclaimer of this talk, this is my opinions only. I don't represent my company. And much like the title of this talk, citations are needed. And I've tried my best to keep all the citations in my notes, and as well as a reference slide at the end for anyone that wants to do additional research. And this is on SlideShare as well. I uploaded it this morning, so if anyone wants a copy, it'll be on the slide at the end. All right, so typical fashion, this talk might contain, triggers, and this is a trigger. It's a huma huma nuku nuku apua. It's the Hawaii state fish, and the typical stuff that you see in these types of talks. So of course this is CarolinaCon, so it's always a drinking contest for any talk. So one of my old favorites, if you hear or see this particular term from a while back, I'm not going to say it and give anyone an excuse, or a bunch of C words anywhere littered throughout talks, take a drink. Or if anyone's bringing the gloom and doom that this is the end of the world, take a drink. Because as much as we want it to be the end of the world, chances are the world will continue to go despite all the different breaches and things like that. So about me, I thought, well, who better to introduce myself than myself? So this is 14-year-old Dave doing an introduction here.
So where are we at? What are we doing?
What are we doing? We're recording.
Okay, my name is Gatekeeper. It's my alias name. I'm an anarchist.
All right. So, you gotta love it. 14 years old, you get on a BBS, you get some recipes, and I proceed to go and build some explosives after this. I figured we don't need any more ammo for any of the three-letter agencies. So I cut it off in there. So let's jump right in.
Bullshit!
The failure of social engineering.
Right-wing social engineering.
Social engineer.
Games.
So what's social engineering?
Left-wing social engineering.
Social engineer.
Love games.
Social engineering.
Socially engineered.
This is bullshit.
All right, so there's some references in there too, and obviously most everyone here is coming up and speaking as Old Greg. If you're not familiar with that meme or that comedy sketch, take 10 minutes during your break and watch it on YouTube. It's pretty hilarious, and it'll give you some context as to some of the things you'll see the rest of the weekend here. So I want to go ahead and actually missed a slide here. Yeah, I want to go ahead and define what social and engineer actually mean, the actual words, because I think that we're kind of using these terms incorrectly as far as relating to everybody in the world. When we talk about being social, we talk about we're relating to activities, we enjoy spending time with 5 different Locksport crews here, and that's generally speaking some pretty fun people hanging out in Lockpig Village, and also playing with people. The last one, maybe not so much relating to people or society in general. We tend to kind of fail at that. We don't relate to everybody, but we got 2 of the 3 definitions correct. A definition of an engineer, and this has always bothered me because I've been a Microsoft certified systems engineer for like 14 years or something like that. Did I go to engineering school? No, I never went to engineering school. So an engineer is technically a person who has scientific training and builds complicated products, machines, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, that picture is like the hardest thing I've ever found on the internet for this talk, is because the internet doesn't think that women can be engineers. They think that they could dress up as engineers in costumes. So actually, this is a an engineer working at an oil refinery. So engineer is also a person that's in charge of running a ship, like these two gentlemen, or a person that runs a train, like this guy. So the term engineering is actually applying the science of all these different things like physics and chemistry and mathematics. It's a special knowledge associated with. So you have mechanical engineering and architectural engineering, and I don't even know what you'd call the large collider engineering. I mean, that's really what an engineer is. It's a specific scientific practice by a person that actually has a degree or some type of PhD in engineering. So I think it's a misnomer that we call people engineers. I mean, I'm technically an information security engineer, but I don't have a degree in engineering. So we tend to throw that term around quite a bit. So let's stop calling it social engineering. Let's call it what it really is. It's manipulation. So how do we apply manipulation in information security? Well, we do it through phishing emails and things like that. We do it through phone calls. There's various different types of phone scams and things like that. One is called vishing, where you're actually talking the person out of their information, or smishing, which you're using short code messages or MMS on the phones to trick somebody out of information. Dumpster diving, you're looking for information about a person so that you can manipulate them further. Doxing, which you're finding information about the person and openly disclosing it to embarrass the person or to further an attack. And open source intelligence, and I apologize, that is kind of a smattering of different things there. If anyone's familiar with the tool Maltego, it's great for open source intelligence, but it's great for also finding, manipulating people based on companies, organizations, persons, and so on and so forth. But this isn't a technical talk, this is a talk about people. So we'll just dive in real quick into the history of manipulation and deception. Now, the Bible, take it or leave it however you feel about the Bible, but the story about Adam and Eve is probably one of the first recorded events of manipulation and deception. And just quickly to recap what happened there. Adam was put on the earth by God. God said, hey, I'm going to create a companion for you. You guys are going to be prosperous, fill the earth, make it a garden, and you're going to serve me. Another angel saw this and became envious of this, said, I can turn them away. Talked to Eve. Eve said, if you eat this fruit, you can be like me, no good and bad, and you don't need God. And therefore, they were outcast from the garden because of manipulation and deception on the part of that angel. False weights. In ancient marketplaces, was a common practice to switch the weights. You'd have an official weight set up by the tax collectors of the area, and the merchants would oftentimes switch those weights. So you think you're buying a unit of grain, when in fact you might be paying for only 3/4 of a unit of grain and deceiving people there. Clothing, makeup, and smells are also a type of deception that have been used for many millennia. Well, maybe not that long, but anyway, so archaeological evidence shows that our ancestors used ochre, which is a reddish powder, and the reason it's done that, and it happens today, the reason it was done that is to simulate the time that a woman is ovulating, and this is to attract the male. So we carry some of these practices today, and we might not even realize it. Egyptian women used a green paste, kind of like modern day eyeshadow. You see here Cleopatra in the movie there. They used wigs and things like that to accentuate the eyes, to exaggerate the fullness of their lips. In Greek and Roman times, the women would dye their hair blonde, apply makeup to cover blemishes, and lighten their skin, and use pumice to remove unwanted body hair. All of these things are obviously for a deception in the form of attracting another person. So from a young age, we are taught to be deceptive to people. And you don't really think about it that way because you're taught to be polite. You're taught if you go to a place, you go to your grandparents' house and you sit on grandfather's lap and his breath is horrible, you're told to just not say anything, because you're not supposed to say anything bad unless, well, never, really, to be polite. But, you know, if you got this guy here, obviously you're thinking to yourself, this guy doesn't really quite fit in here, but are you going to be the one to go up and tell him that that's not appropriate in our culture? Probably not. Now, in Asian culture, you see this in films all the time, and I don't think it's a problem. Here, it's a little differently. We've been taught from a young age to be respectful and watching a person's feelings. So we always telling people white lies about how we really feel. Now, Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, I don't want to get too far down that hole there, but we've been deceiving ourselves or our children for a long time with these myths. They're based in pagan teachings, and we brought them into Christianity. The history of Christmas and actually of Easter, when Constantine decided that he has all these Christians that he's conquered and he's got all these pagans in this huge empire, how do we get everybody to cooperate with each other? The Christians want to practice their things and pagans want to practice their things. Well, they just marry them all together. So we have Saturnalia, which was the festival in wintertime of the winter solstice, which corresponds around December 20th. And we have the spring solstice, which happened actually yesterday, the first day of spring, and that is coincides with Easter, or around that time. So this picture here is that of Odin, and where we get a lot of the stuff from Santa Claus is from Germanic traditions and from Norse traditions. So the god Odin, at Yule time, Odin would actually go on a hunting party, and he would take 8 reindeer and fly through the sky on a hunting party. So we kind of adopted that part. There's another pagan deity, Befana was a Roman goddess that was a gift giver. The Holly King was a Celtic winter god. All these guys formed the basis of Santa Claus and the gift giving and things like that. Easter comes from the goddess Oestri, or Ostara, and her role in Easter was, she was thought to be the divinity who was that of the radiant dawn, the returning of light, the one that brings joy and blessing. So it was pretty easy to adopt that to that of the traditions of the Easter Bunny. She also represented the goddess, she was a goddess of fertility as well. So you have Easter bunnies, you have chicks and things like that. All of these animals are quick reproducers, so they were celebrated for their ability to reproduce quickly, and therefore it was a symbol of procreation. So now that we got some basic history about manipulation and deception, let's go into some of the techniques that actually work. The first one is the rule of reciprocity. It could be called the golden rule. You do unto others as they would have them, or as you would have them do unto you. And in doing so, the exchange is usually on an even level. Now, the example of the Hare Krishna, which is, if some people are familiar with the Hare Krishnas, if you've seen them in public spaces, they're practicing their religion. But one thing they figured out is the rule of reciprocity works to their advantage. And what they would do is they would come up to people in, say, a train station or a bus stop or something like that, and they would hand a person a single flower. And the person's like, well, I never get anything for free. Why is this person giving me a flower? And they'd go to hand it back, and they say, no, it's a gift from the Hare Krishna. But if you'd like, accept the donation from you. So the rule of reciprocity, it's ingrained in us that we receive something free, then, mentally thinking, oh man, I feel kind of guilty. Well, I'm receiving this, I should probably give a donation. Now, obviously, this is something that has happened a long time ago. This was more popular in the late 70s and 80s. So people have kind of adapted to that type of thing. You kind of are weary of anybody that approaches you now. We've all changed our methods because of what they've done. Now, street performers, I was actually in Jackson Square in New Orleans for a conference one time, and I saw these guys doing some breakdance. It was really cool. I really had a good time watching them. I was a big fan of that. But the way they had it set up is you had all these guys who were street performers, and you had one guy that was standing off to the side with a bucket for money. Well, the guy next to him was also in on it, and he starts pouring money into the bucket, and then the guy rapidly goes around the circle and accepts donations from everybody. And he thought, man, these guys did a really good job. I really should give them something there. There, in this case, it's a legitimate thing. It's you enjoyed it, so you give a little money so they can continue their practice. Now, free samples is also a great way to, a sales technique that actually works for reciprocation. And it's not the Costco type of free sample where you're facing a person. That's a little awkward. Sometimes you're easily able to just take whatever and walk away and not have to deal with it. When I was doing the research for this talk, it brought me to something I used to take people to when I lived up near New York. It's this olive bar up on the Upper West Side. And the cool thing about this, and you never get anything free in New York except for this olive bar, is you're allowed to walk in that olive bar, and this is not the exact picture, but there's like 50-some barrels of different olives from around the world. You're allowed to eat as many olives as you wanted to while you're in the store, which is pretty cool. You just think, well, you get something for free. Well, what happened was, like 9 times out of 10, I had people from out of town, they flew in, they're staying at a hotel, or they're driving back or something. 9 times out of 10, they were buying a lot of olives. And we're not like we're driving around New York. We're hauling these olives all over New York on the subways and everything else. So it worked. I mean, these guys got to eat some stuff for free, bought a bunch of olives, and I never understood really how that worked until kind of doing some research for this talk as to why that worked. It's because they received something for free, they felt the need to reciprocate there. Now, I'm glad all the Lockfell guys are here. This story is a true story. I will not name names, and it was handed down like a game of telephone to me, so I might get some of the details wrong. Anyhow, the story goes as I recall it, and I might recall it incorrectly. Smirker, don't do it to me. Don't do it to me, man. As the story was related to me, you have a guy and a girl. And the girl is very friendly, very open, very flirty, very come on to just about everybody that she meets. The guy says, well, hey, we're going to go to Vegas, and you want to come with me, and we'll get a room, all that kind of stuff? She's like, sure, totally. I'd love to go do that. Sounds awesome. So they go to Vegas, and what happens is, there's one frame of mind there that what's this girl going to do? Obviously, they're going together. There seems to be some type of romantic relationship. And typically, when you take somebody on vacation, what do you expect going to happen? Something romantic, especially if you're sharing a room together. It was the complete opposite. It did not work at all, fell apart. She did not have any expectations of that. She just was socially different. And the fact that she did not realize what she was doing could be conveyed differently. So in this type of scenario, where the way traditional relationships work, the reciprocity was failed. Even though that the expectations didn't need to be there, and that there was some differences of how things work, now you have an entire group of guys that back their friend that's saying she's complete, tease, and then the girl with all her friends like, I have no idea why they all hate me. So there's definitely some, that's an example of reciprocation is a failure, and it can cause, socially, it can cause quite a strain. The next technique is commitment and consistency. Now, if you go to a racetrack and you watch people, they look at the boards, they look at the odds of the horses and what the horses are, what their chances of winning are. And a racetrack bettor will go up and put money down on a specific horse. And once they bet on that horse, now they've committed themselves to that horse. So to stay consistent, they continually bet on that horse over and over and over again because now they've put money down. They've actually put dollars and they want to stay consistent. Now I'll give you another example, and I don't want to downplay anything about abused spouses. And we tend to think that women get abused, but this is actually wasn't on purpose that we have our friend from Australia here, but this was actually a public service announcement from Australia. And the story behind that I wanted to tell about commitment and consistency there, you have a guy and a girl, unmarried, they live together for a long time. The guy, he's a drunk, he drinks a lot, he's not necessarily abusive, but it's not really what the girl wants. The girl wants to get married, wants him to stop drinking. You know, it's a traditional type of story. So what happens? The girl's fed up. She's done. He doesn't want to change. He says, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change. So she leaves. She finds another guy, you know, and they end up together and end up getting an engagement, and everything seems to be going well for her. But the guy's like, hey, calls her up. You know what? I really want to get back with you. I've changed my ways. I'm not going to drink anymore. We're going to get married within a few months after you come back. And what does she do? She thinks back on all the good times they had, and she breaks off this relationship because that's what she really wanted in the first place, is this guy that to make those changes. So what happens? She moves back in. A few weeks go by. He starts drinking again. A few years go by. They're still not married. But what happens in this case? Because she has committed to moving back in and pushing out her changed ways, now she has aligned herself with being with this guy, and now she has to stay consistent in her own mind to keep her from going insane. So now she's gone back, and now she's back in the exact same relationship, but she loves him more now than she did before she left. Another way that commitment and consistency works, and the toy industry is pretty good about using this technique. I know growing up, and I've never celebrated Christmas myself, but I knew in December then that was when all the cool games were coming out, the cool consoles and stuff like that were coming out. And so I always wanted, you know, what was coming out in December. Well, the toy companies couldn't figure out how to keep their sales up after Christmas. Obviously, Christmas time, the fourth quarter, was their big rush on sales. On toy sales. So they figured it out. They knew people would want to keep their promises to their children. So what would they do? They'd advertise. This is the new talking robot that pees and poops and all this other stuff, or this is the new game console. And the kid's like, that's all I want for Christmas, all I want. Parents like, absolutely, that's what you're getting for Christmas, hands down, I promise it to you. What happens? That toy, it doesn't exist other than a few people that are able to get it in a mad rush at a department store. But what happens after the new year goes around? Seemingly truckloads of the same toy go on the shelves, and now the parent feels obligated, despite buying toys for the child during Christmas time. Now the parent, because he promised that child that he would have that toy, he goes and actually spends that money to buy that toy after Christmas. Why? Because he committed to that child. And if he doesn't stay consistent, then how is he ever going to teach that child that let your yes mean yes, or keep your promises, don't break your word? Because he did that. So, I mean, the toy industry is pretty genius when it comes to figuring that type of stuff out. Okay. Sorry, for some reason, the alcohol I drank last night made me dehydrated. Pacing and matching. So we're gonna switch gears, and well, not necessarily switch gears. We're gonna talk about neuro-linguistic programming. Now, one of my friends came up to me last night, and I was talking about this talk, and he asked me if I'd ever seen CSI C-word. Evidently, I guess they're starting to. You drink. I'm not drinking. So evidently, they started bringing in some of these. Techniques that I'm going to talk about here, but no, I don't watch that show. I don't even have a TV. I download stuff off the internet, completely legal off the internet too. But so we're just going to go over a few of these things, and it really does tie into us working with people and building relationships, but also identifying when someone is taking advantage of us. So the first technique is called pacing and matching. And it's similar in method acting here. We got Johnny Depp talking about if you're not putting a certain amount of yourself into acting, then you're actually lying. And that's similar to pacing and matching. What that means is it's not mirroring, as we're going to talk about that next. It's not an identical representation. If someone crosses their arms, you sit there and cross your arms. If someone touches their face, you sit there and cross your face. You don't want to do that because if you're just starting off doing these types of things, it can be really noticeable and really obvious that that's what you're doing. And some people will see that and they'll take it as that you're trying to take advantage of them. So what you do is you mimic somebody's body language and speech in order to build that rapport. Now what I mean is if somebody has a comfortable stance, then you can take a comfortable stance as well. If they're more rigid, then you take a more rigid stance. If somebody is in a conversation with another person and their feet are straight forward, then you know that that conversation is closed. If they're standing more open, you know that that's open and that you can approach. So you're pacing and you're matching that person. You're integrating elements of your own. So you have this actor here that has all these different elements. So you can tell from his facial expressions, which we'll get into further, that kind of what the person's feeling. Now you bring your vocabulary in line with the person. Now this country girl here, you're probably not going to go up to her and start talking about stuff like when you lived in New York City or using an accent from there or from Wisconsin, because she's probably not going to catch it. She's probably from this area here. She's going to lose a lot of that in that world. And especially if you have someone like this, I don't even know how to describe the vocabulary used there, but you have to bring, or why would you even talk to that person? But But you bring your vocabulary in line with the person. We're going to talk about it a little bit further, but basically you're not going to use words that are going to make the other person feel uncomfortable. If the person hasn't graduated high school, you're not going to use college level words and things like that. It'll make them feel uncomfortable. Now there's several different types of mirror when we talk about mirroring. Behavioral mirroring is for example, and this is how this works, is that many men don't realize it, but when they speak with a woman, they'll bring their pitch up a little bit. It's kind of a natural thing because survival of the species says that we need to actually cooperate and reproduce and things like that, and dragging the woman out by her hair out of the cave wasn't effective for generations. So obviously the rapport between man and woman to keep the species going had to change. So men tend to mirror women in order for them, well, we all know how the story goes there anyway. Never mind, I'm going to keep this as PC as possible, God's sake. All right, wardrobe. This is symbolic mirroring. And I use Marty McFly. I didn't actually have this costume. But so the story that I thought of when I thought of symbolic mirroring is that of wardrobe. And when I moved to Texas, I started working for an organization of local county governments. I actually talked about that last year a little bit in my talk then. But these guys were all ex-officials from local government. You got judges and commissioners and sheriffs and things like that. And these guys and Texas is the Wild West. I've no doubt. I mean, if you think any differently, please go to Texas and check it out because it is still crazy out there. And we still had counties out there that were doing things over general ledger, did not even have computers. It was crazy. But anyway, so I found that going to visit these counties, and me, I drive an old hippie van, and I dress like this. I got an old Volkswagen van. And I found that showing up for appointments and wearing what I'm wearing now didn't tender well with a lot of the guys there. So what did I do? I actually did get a hat and got some boots and some Wranglers. And when I went and showed up, guess what? Now I was received as one of their own. So you can symbolically mirror a person in that way. Another way that you can use symbolic mirroring is in writing. If you're a liberal person and you're trying to express your views to a conservative audience, you don't want to speak like a liberal. It doesn't work. Rather, so there's an example of a guy that actually wrote a piece as a liberal about Cuba and Fidel Castro. But he did it in such a way to speak to conservatives about that. But how did he do it? He used conservative language. And all of us have our different language base. I mean, as computer security people, we all know generally what we're all talking about when we come to these conferences. Conservatives and liberals all speak differently as well. He was able to pin his liberal argument in a way that, in conservative vocabulary and language, that actually enraged some liberals. They didn't look at the underlying message. They're like, "You're being a conservative. What happened?" Like, did you actually read it? No, it's because they were using this. He was using the same vocabulary and symbolically mirroring the way that Republicans or conservatives would actually write an article. Exchange matches is not necessarily exactly mirroring, but it's substituting one part of the body for another. Like the example I like is that of breathing, which is a technique that's very difficult to achieve. So if someone's breathing and you're watching them, their chest rise and fall, you can actually switch out with your hand. You can tap your side, and this will actually allow you to kind of get in sync with how they're breathing, without them actually knowing what you're doing, or tapping your foot, or however else. So you're substituting part of your body for another. So you're not necessarily being very obvious the way that you're mirroring the person. This is a lot more disarming, and it tends to work and not get you caught doing an exact mirroring. Now, perfect example of using hands to control breathing or how mirroring works effectively. Have you ever gone up to somebody that's super upset or angry, and the first thing you do is like, calm down, right? What does that do? Your hands are mirroring what you want their breathing to be. So you're bringing them back down again. Bring them back down. So you can use your hands there. I don't think that's what the president's doing there, but I figured I'd put a bunch of presidential slides in as well. So another part of neuro-linguistic programming is building and maintaining rapport between people. Now, showing interest in a person, and you got this guy here. I think I was that guy at some point. Actually still am. But anyway, so he's at this party, he's a shy guy, and what do you think would happen if these two girls in the back would go up and start talking to him? He'd flip out. I mean, he'd probably just run away and hide. So showing interest in a person doesn't necessarily build rapport. It's a positive connection. Just like me, I speak from my heart and my vision, and a lot of times, and sometimes I come across like that because I'm speaking what I feel. And of course, we got a lot of sarcasm and cynicism in this audience, so if you guys are saying this guy's a tool, that's fine. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. But because this guy is so obnoxious and so in your face, you might be like, oh my God, what is wrong with this guy? And you can't build rapport that way either. So sensory acuity is a technique that we already have some grasp on subconsciously. So you're looking at a person and you're trying to figure out, and this guy here, he's got all these different things about him that you're trying to figure out. So you start off by, and this is a skill that has to be built upon, you start off by noting certain nuances about people. And as humans, we automatically, as we build relationships, we automatically do these things so we can gain common ground. But how many people here have actually walked into a room not knowing anything about any people in the room, and there's somebody in that room that makes you immediately uncomfortable? I know it's when I enter the room, everyone else is uncomfortable. So, no, but you don't understand why. You feel uncomfortable, but you're not quite sure why. Sensory acuity will actually find out why that person's telegraphing something that bothers you. So as you learn to look at some of these things that we're going to talk about, you can actually pick up on some of those vibes, some of those things that are being telegraphed as to why that person creeps you out. Now, a good cardiologist will tell you when they start listening to people's hearts, the first thing they heard was just the basic lub-dub, dub-dub. But after a while, they're able to pick up on stuff like prolapse valves, heart murmurs, so much more. When you go to the doctor, they don't listen to just one spot. They're going all around. They test your back and everything else. That's a trained ear. Similar to sensory acuity, through practice, you're going to start picking up on things that you haven't done up until then. So speech. Pause or delay here. So Some people correlate to, and they do this in the media a lot, some people say, well, if you ask a person a question and they can't immediately think of an answer, then they're being deceptive. I say that you need practice to understand really what's going on. I'll give you an example. If I asked one of you here, what were you doing 7 years ago today? You're going to be like this guy. Like, I have no idea. I was doing 7 years old today, or 7 years ago today. But if you ask them if they robbed a convenience store 7 years ago today, their answer would be no. If they think too long and hard about it, maybe they were knocking over a convenience store 7 years. I love that movie. Oh, God. So good. All right. The stress level of the voice can really show anxiety or catching somebody off guard. So if you ask someone a question or you find somebody in a situation and they immediately get nervous, dry mouth can show that, that and alcohol abuse. Anxiety or alarm. So if public speaking is obviously something that causes a lot of people anxiety. Myself is definitely this is the first talk I think I've done sober in a while, which is good because actually I can think through this better. But you can tell that if a person, if they get dry mouth or if they are starting to sweat or things like that, you can tell that there's something wrong with it, with what they're talking to you about. And then the accent, we're going to go back to these two again, because you can not only tell that maybe she's from like North Carolina or something like that, and that she's from whatever planet she's from, also tell their educational level. If you're talking to somebody, I know where I live outside of Gastonia, near Charlotte, we got a lot of working class people there, and a lot of them probably didn't finish high school. But when I go into the local establishments there, I don't use huge vocabulary words or try and make them feel uncomfortable, because I can tell by their language, the way they're speaking to me, you can tell kind of how far along they went. Not that that's a bad thing. There's no negatives there, but you're able to pick up on those things so that you don't slip up when you're building rapport. You're able to understand where that person's coming from. And therefore, the term in jiu-jitsu is close that gap. So you want to try and close the gap of that level there between two people. So you don't want to actually mimic their accent either. That's pretty insulting and possibly racist. So you want to be careful about that. But you want to be able to understand that your speech makes a difference, and it'll actually help you close that gap between two people. Body language is interesting. Stress levels can change in an instant. You can tell a lot about a person by what it looks like. Obviously, well, I think his face was stuck like this, but you can tell he's pretty upset about something. You got the Obamas here, and I don't know, one's disgusted, one's surprised, I guess. Like what's going on here? I don't know. Obama looks content, and Michelle looks shocked. I wonder where they're. Never mind. So the flight or fight response is something that is ingrained in all of us, and that is the sympathetic nervous system. And it's something that, you have to be a trained con man to really kind of cycle that off and on. Because if something shocking happens, or if you become like dead inside, like some people, you don't have that problem. But for the most of us, if something shocking happens or something pleasing happens, it's going to show on our face. That's why poker games and things like that, people wear stuff to avoid allowing people to see their eyes. Because seeing people's eyes and seeing what people do, you can tell a lot about what they're saying. Now, this picture here illustrates a technique in deception or of understanding if someone's lying to you. It's called shielding. If someone puts their hand up when they're to the mouth while they're giving a response, or they're kind of looking around with their eyes, or just kind of wandering around, they're probably doing something deceptive, like Smirker does all the time. But obviously Lance Armstrong, this is, I think, a picture before he was actually confirmed that he was using drugs, and this was in an interview, I think it's South by Southwest, and they asked him that question, and well, that right there kind of shows that he was hiding something there. Another thing you can look at is, well, we've all seen this guy, I think, on the internet, but there's definitely something wrong with this guy. Either he's cracked out or something, but obviously this is an extreme case, but if you're dealing with somebody, you're talking with somebody that's got, their pupils get dilated or they get thin lips and kind of get more reserved, pull back into themselves, they're probably something wrong. There's something that you've said to them that is invoking that flight or fight response that you can pick up on and actually use in your sensory acuity. Calibration is the understanding or the using of sensory acuity, and you see we're building on these things here. But using sensory acuity to gauge the state the person's in. And so we go back to this method actor here. There's a lot of different expressions on his face. If you see somebody and you understand that they're obviously terrified, what you do is you become terrified yourself in a sense so that you can bridge that gap between the person. So you recognize it and you act upon it so that when you approach the person, you don't want to go to a terrified person, hey, how's it going? No, that's not going to work. They're going to be put off. But if you come up with that sympathetic idea of that they're terrified, I know how that feels, then you're able to bridge that gap as well. So once you understand their state, you're able to cultivate that feeling in yourself. Posture, another good way of doing things to kind of ease the person in is to adopt the person's stance or sitting position so that they feel comfortable with you. And he goes from quite extremes here. Each one of those frames has a different expression and a different way of setting posture. So being able to adapt and understand the person's posture really is important in learning about the person and bridging that gap again. Movement, and we talk about gesturing, how fast, how slow, how often, how open and closed. If a person is doing this, you're probably talking to a New York Italian. Just by the hand movements, they're very vocal with their hands, and they probably can't speak without their hands. In fact, my wife is that way. If you tied her hands behind her back, she probably couldn't speak. But you might have people that they're like this. They are not willing to talk, or they're sitting at their table like this. You don't want to come up to them and just be flamboyant. Hey, what's going on? They're probably going to be put off by that. Once again, we're using sensory acuity to help bridge that gap between us. Now, this is a pretty old skit, and I use it because it's a pretty decent mirroring technique, or illustration of mirroring, but breathing is probably the creme de la creme of NLP, in the fact that once you master it, you're pretty much a hypnotist. And it's used in hypnotics because what you're doing is you're matching your own breathing with the other person's breathing. And in doing so, once you match it to a certain extent, now you can manipulate that person by breathing faster or shallower. Now, one thing about this, one caveat, if you're a man and you're trying to match a woman's breathing, probably not the best idea to be staring at her chest. That would probably get you in trouble. So instead, look at the shoulder levels. The shoulders move just as much as the chest does during breathing, so when you're matching, you can actually, yeah, well, not as much fun, but if you're trying to bridge that gap and build that rapport, yeah, you might get to later on after you build that rapport. Yeah, it depends on what you're into. Okay, so the wrap up here on this, what I'm really trying to get across is that we have this mindset of social engineering, and the media has a mindset of how it works, and us as security people have it, how it works. Really, we need to look at the human element itself. We apply social engineering and manipulation at a technical level. We think about, gathering credentials and information. Criminals think about taking people's identities and things like that. But really, understanding what we're looking at, it helps us not only build rapport with other people, but it helps us identify how people are trying to take advantage of us. And so taking this information home, we can actually use it to better educate our families, or especially since we're all professionals here, well, most of us are professionals here, we can take it back and help to protect our companies. There's a lot of C-word threats out there, and we want to make sure that we help in every way we can. And that's my talk. I'd like to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you. Great to have an engineer in here to give us perspective. You have to have a degree to be called an engineer, and I just hate that. That's just one of my pet peeves. Any other questions? All right, well, here my slideshow is up. I uploaded it just before coming in here if anyone wants. There's some additional research. Those are pretty large books, but they are interesting reads, to say the least. I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time, and it was great to actually be kind of pushed into it. So I have a better understanding, because I'm actually going to be working on building a social engineering awareness program. And actually, another presentation I'll be doing is how to build it yourself. So this was great for me, and I hope it's been good for you. Thanks.